didn't lose it by accident. And that's the part no one tells you. There was a moment when something slipped out of your life. Something you thought was meant to stay. Something you believed you had finally secured. And when it left, it didn't just leave a gap, it left questions. Questions you couldn't answer, reasons you couldn't fully understand. You may have blamed yourself, wondering if you could have done something differently, said something better, held on a little longer. And even now, a part of you still goes back to that moment, trying to make sense of why it didn't work out the way you expected. But listen carefully. What you experienced was not a mistake, and it was not taken from you without purpose. God is not limited by your expectations, and sometimes what feels like a loss is actually a movement, a shift, a redirection that your current perspective cannot yet fully see. Because if something is truly meant to remain in your life, it does not leave in confusion, it does not collapse in uncertainty, and it does not create a constant sense of misalignment within you. What you felt in that moment wasn't just loss. It was interruption. An interruption of a path that was not designed to carry you where you are meant to go. And the reason it feels so difficult to accept is because you were looking at it from where you were, not from where you are being led. But this moment right here, this realization, is where everything begins to change. There were things happening behind the scenes that you were never meant to see in that moment, and that is why it felt so confusing when everything began to shift. You were looking at what was leaving, but you couldn't yet see what you were being protected from. And that's where most people misunderstand these moments. They focus on what disappeared, instead of asking what it was preventing. Because not every closed door is a rejection, and not every ending is a failure. Sometimes it is guidance, quiet and unseen, moving you away from a direction that would not have supported who you are becoming. And listen carefully. God does not remove something from your life without a reason that goes deeper than what you can immediately understand. There were outcomes you could not predict. Situations that may have seemed right on the surface, but carried consequences you were not aware of. Paths that may have felt comfortable, but would have eventually led you further away from your purpose. You may have been trying to hold things together, putting in effort, giving your energy, hoping that consistency alone would make things work. But even with all that effort, something still felt off. Something didn't fully settle, didn't fully align, didn't fully give you the sense of peace you were looking for. And that feeling, that quiet sense that something wasn't right, was not something to ignore. It was a signal. Because when something is truly meant for you, it doesn't require you to constantly question its place in your life. It doesn't leave you feeling uncertain about where you stand. It doesn't create a cycle of hope, followed by confusion. And yet, you may have stayed longer than you needed to, not because it was right, but because you wanted it to be right. And that's why the redirection had to happen the way it did. Not gradually, not gently, in a way that you could easily ignore, but in a way that made it impossible to continue as things were. Because sometimes clarity doesn't come through explanation. It comes through removal. It comes through a moment where what you were holding on to is no longer there, forcing you to step back and see the situation for what it truly was, not what you hoped it would become. And even though that moment may have felt like everything was falling apart, it was actually everything being realigned. There were things connected to that situation that you didn't fully recognize at the time. Patterns that would have repeated themselves. Limitations that would have kept you in the same place. Experiences that may have slowly drained your energy without you realizing it until much later. And by the time you would have understood it, you may have already invested more time, more emotion, more of yourself into something that was never meant to carry you forward. So what felt like a sudden loss was actually a form of protection, a way of redirecting you before you went too far down a path that was not aligned with your future, and this is where your perspective begins to shift. Because once you start to see it this way, you realize that what happened was not working against you. It was working for you in a way that required distance to understand. At the time, you could only see what you were losing, But now you can begin to see what you are being saved from. And that understanding, even if it comes slowly, changes everything. Now listen closely, because this is where the truth becomes deeper than what you first felt. What happened in your life was not random, and it was not simply about something ending. It was about something being moved out of the way. Because not everything that feels right is meant to stay, and not everything that leaves is meant to be lost. Sometimes what you hold on to the most is the very thing that quietly limits your growth. And that's the part that's difficult to accept, because you didn't see it that way at the time. You saw value, you saw potential, you saw something you believed could work if you just held on a little longer. But listen carefully. What you saw was based on where you were, not where you are being led. And God sees beyond that moment, beyond your expectations, beyond what you thought was enough. The truth is, some things are removed, not because they are completely wrong, but because they are not fully right for your future. They may have had meaning, they may have taught you something, they may have even brought moments of happiness, but they were never meant to be permanent. And that's why there was always something missing, something that didn't fully settle, something that made you question, even when things seemed okay on the surface. You may have ignored those signs, telling yourself that no situation is perfect, that everything requires effort, that things will eventually align if you just stay patient. But deep down, there was always a part of you that felt the difference between something that fits and something you are trying to make fit. And this is why it had to happen the way it did. Because if it had ended slowly, you might have continued adjusting, compromising, convincing yourself to stay. If it had faded quietly, you might have followed it, trying to restore what was already meant to end. But instead, it shifted in a way that forced you to stop, to feel, to confront what was really happening. And even though that moment felt like loss, it was actually clarity arriving in a form you could not ignore. Because sometimes the only way to break attachment is through disruption, through a change strong enough to separate you from what you would have otherwise held on to. And here is something you need to understand. Holding on to something that is not aligned does not preserve it, it delays you. It keeps you connected to a version of your life that you have already outgrown. And the longer you stay connected to it, the longer you remain in a space that cannot evolve into what is meant for you. Because what is meant for your future requires room, requires movement, requires you to be available for something different. And that cannot happen if you are still anchored to what belongs to your past. You may have felt like something was taken from you, like something was removed before you were ready. But the truth is, you were more ready than you realized. The only thing that hadn't caught up yet was your perspective. And now, as you begin to look at it differently, you can start to see that what happened was not about losing something valuable. It was about creating space for something more aligned with who you are becoming. Because every ending that feels painful carries within it the beginning of something that could not arrive any other way. Now this is the point where everything begins to reveal itself, not all at once, not in a way that immediately answers every question, but in a way that slowly changes how you see what happened. Because once something is removed from your life, there is always a space left behind, and at first that space can feel uncomfortable. It can feel empty, uncertain, even unsettling. You may have tried to fill it quickly, to distract yourself from it, to replace what was lost so you wouldn't have to sit with that feeling. But listen carefully. That space was not created to be filled immediately. It was created to be prepared, because what is meant to enter your life next cannot fit into the version of your life that existed before. And that is why the clearing had to happen first. God is not just removing things from your path, He is rearranging it, making room for something that aligns with where you are being led, not where you were. At first, the changes may feel subtle. You may not notice anything dramatic, no sudden breakthroughs, no immediate rewards. But if you pay attention, you will begin to see small shifts. The way you think starts to change. The way you respond to situations becomes different. Things that once felt important no longer carry the same weight, and things you never considered before begin to draw your attention. And these small changes, they are not random. They are signs that something new is beginning to form in your life. Something that could not have taken shape if everything had stayed the same. You may also begin to notice that new opportunities start appearing, but not in the way you expected. They may come quietly, without announcement, through conversations, ideas, or moments that seem simple at first, but carry deeper meaning. And the difference now is that you are able to see them more clearly, because you are no longer distracted by what was holding you back. When you are connected to something that is not aligned, it limits your ability to recognize what is. But once that connection is broken, your awareness expands, and you begin to notice possibilities that were always there, but hidden by your attachment to what you thought you needed. And this is where the shift becomes undeniable, because what once felt like emptiness begins to feel like openness. What once felt like loss begins to feel like movement. You start to realize that nothing was taken from you without purpose, nothing ended without reason, and nothing left without creating space for something better suited to your path. And even though you may not yet see the full picture, you begin to trust the direction you are being guided toward, not because you have all the answers, but because you can feel the difference within yourself. This is the part where alignment begins to replace confusion, where clarity starts to take the place of doubt, where you no longer feel the need to force things to work, because what is meant for you begins to flow more naturally into your life. And that doesn't mean everything becomes perfect. It means everything becomes more real, more stable, more connected to who you are now, not who you were before. Because what is coming into your life is not a replacement for what you lost. It is a reflection of who you are becoming. And that is why this stage is so important, because it teaches you to recognize the difference between something that simply exists in your life and something that truly belongs in it. It shows you that what is aligned does not create constant confusion. It creates a sense of direction. It shows you that what is meant for you does not require you to hold on tightly out of fear. It allows you to move forward with a sense of trust. And once you understand that, you begin to see that what you thought was the end was actually the beginning of something that could only arrive after everything else had been cleared away. Now this is the moment where everything comes together. And this is where your perspective must fully shift, because you are no longer standing in the place of loss. You are standing in the place of understanding. What once felt like something being taken from you now begins to reveal itself as something that was guiding you forward all along. But listen carefully. This final step is not automatic. It requires a decision from you, a decision to stop looking back at what left as if it was supposed to stay, and to start looking ahead at where you are being led. Because as long as your focus remains on what is behind you, you will struggle to fully step into what is in front of you. And God is not calling you to remain attached to what has already served its purpose. He is calling you to trust what is unfolding next. You may still feel moments where your mind drifts back, where you revisit what happened, where you wonder how things could have been different. That is natural, because you are human, and your mind tries to find closure in what it once held on to. But listen to this. Closure does not always come from answers. It comes from acceptance. Acceptance that what left your life did so for a reason, even if that reason was not clear at the time. Acceptance that not everything you value is meant to remain with you. And acceptance that your path is not defined by what you lost, but by where you are going. And this is where trust becomes important. Not blind trust, but a deeper understanding that your life is not unfolding randomly. There is direction in what you have experienced. There is purpose in what has shifted, and there is meaning in what has been removed. Because once you accept that nothing meant for you can truly pass you by, you begin to release the need to chase what has already left. You stop trying to recreate what once was, and you open yourself to what can be. And that shift, that internal decision, is what allows you to move forward without hesitation. As you continue stepping into this new phase of your life, you will begin to notice that your energy changes. You become less focused on what is missing and more aware of what is present. You begin to appreciate the direction you are moving in, even if you cannot yet see the full destination. And that sense of movement replaces the feeling of being stuck, because you are no longer holding yourself in a place that no longer aligns with your growth. Instead, you are allowing yourself to move with the process, to trust it, to follow it without needing to control every outcome. And this is where everything becomes different. Because once you truly understand that what you thought was a loss was actually a redirection, you stop fearing change. You stop resisting endings. You begin to see them for what they are, transitions into something that could not arrive any other way. And that understanding gives you a kind of peace that does not depend on circumstances, a kind of clarity that does not require constant reassurance. Because you know, at a deeper level, that your life is not falling apart, it is being aligned. So this moment right here is your confirmation. Not that everything will suddenly become easy, but that everything is moving in the direction it needs to. You are not behind, you are not missing out, and you have not lost what was meant for you. You are exactly where you need to be to receive what is coming next. And the more you trust that, the more you release the past. The more you allow yourself to step forward without looking back, the more clearly you will see that what you once questioned was actually guiding you all along.